The crack of the axle echoed across the arid desert like a gunshot, sending crows scattering into the clear Arizona sky as Zara Calloway slammed her palms against the wagon's wooden frame in frustration. Miles from quartzsite, with the merciless July sun of 1878 beating down on her, she surveyed the damage to her wagon with mounting despair. The rear axle had completely splintered beneath the weight of her supplies, and the wheel lay uselessly in the dirt. Perspiration trickled down her neck, dampening the collar of her blue calico dress as she tried to decide what to do next. "Blasted thing," Zara muttered, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. At 24, she'd grown accustomed to handling difficulties on her own, but this was beyond her ability to repair. She glanced around at the endless stretches of sagebrush and cacti with no sign of another soul for miles. The road to quartzsite stretched behind her, shimmering with heat, while ahead lay the small homestead she'd inherited from her late uncle still a good 5 miles away. She reached for her canteen, taking a careful sip of the warm water. Her horse, Penny, nickered softly from where she stood, still harnessed to the broken wagon. "I know, girl," Zara soothed. "We're in quite a fix." The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her straighten, her hand instinctively moving to the small revolver tucked in her pocket. The Arizona territory could be dangerous for a woman alone, especially one with a wagon load of supplies. As the rider approached, Zara could make out the silhouette of a man atop a sturdy chestnut stallion. He rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared beneath a dust-covered denim jacket. A well-worn Stetson shaded his face, but she could see the glint of alert eyes scanning the road ahead. The stranger slowed his horse as he neared, raising one hand in greeting. "Looks like you've had some trouble, madam," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. Zara nodded, keeping her hand near her pocket. Axles broken clean through, bad luck at its finest. The man dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse closer. As he approached, she could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline darkened by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, a striking shade of green, assessed the damage to her wagon with practiced efficiency. "Name's Garrett Jameson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Ranch hand over at the Triple Creek, was heading into town when I spotted your wagon." He glanced at her, his expression frank but not unfriendly. "Mind if I take a look?" Zara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Please do." "I'm Zara Calloway. Just arrived from Kansas City last week to claim my uncle's property north of quartzsite." "The old Harper place?" Garrett asked, kneeling to examine the broken axle. "That's the one, my mother's brother." She watched as he ran his hands along the splintered wood. "Can it be fixed?" Garrett's brow furrowed as he assessed the damage. "It'll need a complete replacement, but I might be able to make a temporary repair to get you home." He glanced up at her. "You've got tools in the wagon, some basic ones." Uncle Joseph was apparently quite the handyman, according to the lawyer who handled his will. Garrett nodded and stood, brushing the dust from his hands. "Let me see what you've got. We'll need to unload some of your cargo to take the weight off while we work." For the next hour, they worked together to unload the essential items from the wagon, stacking crates and barrels in the shade of a nearby mesquite tree. Zara was grateful for the help, but maintained a careful distance. Life had taught her that kindness from strangers often came with expectations. "What brings you to quartzsite, Miss Calloway?" Garrett asked as he rummaged through the toolbox she'd provided. "Not many women venture out here alone." "A fresh start," she replied simply, handing him a length of rope he'd requested. "After my parents passed last winter, there wasn't much left for me in Kansas City." Garrett nodded, not pressing further as he began fashioning a splint for the broken axle using pieces of wood from a spare crate. "Arizona territory's a hard place for anyone starting fresh, especially a woman on her own." "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Jameson." There was a quiet pride in her voice, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." A hint of a smile crossed his face as he glanced up at her. "Never said you weren't, madam." The repair was grueling work under the blistering sun. Garrett fashioned a temporary support for the axle using the wood, rope, and several metal brackets from her tools. Zara worked alongside him, following his instructions and offering suggestions of her own. When he lifted the wagon to position the makeshift repair, she admired the strength in his arms and shoulders, the concentration in his expression as sweat dripped from his brow. "This won't hold forever," he explained, tightening the final knot in the rope binding the repair together. "But it should get you home. You'll want to travel slow and avoid the rough patches in the road." "I can't thank you enough," Zara said, genuine gratitude in her voice as she helped reload the wagon with their combined effort. "I would have been stranded out here if you hadn't come along." "Wouldn't be right to leave a lady in distress," he replied, his expression softening slightly. "Besides, neighbors look out for each other in these parts." "Neighbors?" she questioned. "Triple Creek borders your uncle's land to the west," he explained, securing the last crate. "We're the closest ranch to your property." As they finished loading the wagon, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty road. Garrett checked the repair one final time before turning to her. "I'll ride alongside you to make sure you get home safely," he said, mounting his horse. "That repair might need adjusting along the way." Zara climbed onto the wagon seat, taking up the reins. "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Jameson. I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's no imposition," he assured her, his expression earnest beneath the brim of his hat. "And please call me Garrett." They set off slowly, the wagon creaking precariously with each rotation of the wheels. Zara kept her focus on the road ahead, but she was acutely aware of the cowboy riding beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon with the watchfulness of someone accustomed to the dangers of the territory. "Have you worked at the Triple Creek long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Going on 5 years now," he replied. "Came west from Texas after the war, needed open spaces after too much time in trenches. You fought in the war between the states." She glanced at him with newfound interest, noting that he appeared to be in his early 30s. Enlisted at 17, served under General Hood in the Texas Brigade. His voice held no pride in the statement, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of his past. "Came west afterward like many others, looking to put those years behind me." Zara nodded, understanding all too well the desire to leave painful memories behind. "My father fought for the Union," she said quietly. "He never spoke much about it, but the war stayed with him until the day he died." Garrett's expression remained unchanged, but he nodded. "Some wounds never fully heal, just become easier to carry." They traveled for several miles in companionable silence, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a desert bird. When they reached a particularly rough stretch of road, Garrett dismounted to check the repair, tightening the ropes and adjusting the splint before they continued. As they crested a small rise, Zara caught her first glimpse of her new home in the distance, a modest adobe and wood structure nestled against a backdrop of red rocks, with a small corral and outbuilding visible nearby. The sight filled her with a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. "There it is," she said softly, "Uncle Joseph's place." "Harper was a good man," Garrett commented, his voice holding genuine respect. "Kept to himself mostly, but always ready to lend a hand when needed. Ranch isn't much to look at, but the land's better water supply than most in these parts." "Did you know him well?" Zara asked, curious about the uncle she'd never met. "Well enough. He helped me out my first winter here when a blizzard nearly wiped out our herd. Never asked for anything in return, just said that's what neighbors do." Garrett's expression softened with the memory. "The territory lost a good man when he passed." They reached the property just as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the weathered buildings. The house was small but sturdy, with a covered porch across the front and shuttered windows. A water pump stood in the yard and a clothesline stretched between two posts. It was humble but surprisingly welcoming. Garrett helped her bring the wagon to a stop near the house. "Let me check the place before you go in," he offered, dismounting. "It's been empty for several months." Zara nodded, grateful for his consideration. While he inspected the house, she unhitched Penny from the wagon, leading the tired horse to the corral where a small trough held fresh rainwater from a recent storm. "All clear," Garrett called from the porch. "Looks like the place has held up well." Roofs intact, no signs of animals getting in. Zara joined him on the porch, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation alone in a strange territory, with only this unexpected act of kindness connecting her to another human being. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "No need for thanks," he replied, his voice gentle. "But if you don't mind my saying, you might want to get a proper replacement for that axle sooner rather than later. I can bring one out from town in a few days, help you install it. I'd be happy to pay you for the materials and labor," she said quickly, not wanting to be indebted. A slight smile touched his lips. "We'll work something out." He glanced at the darkening sky. "I should get going while there's still some light." Zara surprised herself by saying, "It's nearly dark. You're welcome to stay for supper. It's the least I can offer after everything you've done today." Garrett hesitated, seeming to weigh the propriety of the situation against the practicality of traveling in the dark. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," she echoed his earlier words with a small smile. "Besides, I'm not sure I'm ready to spend my first night here completely alone." His expression softened with understanding. "In that case, I'd be honored to accept your invitation. Let me see to my horse, and I'll help you unload your supplies." As Garrett tended to his stallion, Zara entered her new home for the first time. The interior was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and a narrow hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furnishings were sparse but functional, and she was relieved to find a stack of firewood beside the hearth. By the time Garrett returned, she had lit several oil lamps, casting a warm glow throughout the main room. Together, they unloaded the essentials from the wagon: food supplies, bedding, and personal items. Zara busied herself preparing a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and biscuits, while Garrett brought in water from the pump and built a fire in the hearth. They ate at the small kitchen table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. Zara found herself studying him when he wasn't looking: the strong line of his jaw, the way the lamplight caught the gold flecks in his green eyes, the capable hands that handled both tools and flatware with equal dexterity. "How long have you been on your own, Miss Calloway?" Garrett asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Please call me Zara," she replied, setting down her fork. "And I suppose I've been on my own since January. That's when my mother passed." She paused, memories washing over her. "Father died last November, influenza. Mother never recovered from the grief, I think." "I'm sorry," he said simply, his voice holding genuine sympathy. "Uncle Joseph was my last living relative, though we'd never met. When the lawyer contacted me about the inheritance, it seemed like a sign." She gazed around the humble room. "A chance to begin again somewhere new." Garrett nodded, understanding in his eyes. Fresh starts are what the West was built on. After they finished eating, Garrett insisted on helping with the dishes before preparing to leave. Standing on the porch, the night sky ablaze with stars, Zara found herself reluctant to see him go. "I can't thank you enough for your help today," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I'll come by in a few days with that axle," he promised, settling his hat on his head. "In the meantime, if you need anything, the Triple Creek's just a couple of miles west. Follow the creek that runs behind your property. It leads straight to our main house." "I'll remember that," she replied, offering her hand. "Good night, Garrett." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Good night, Zara. Welcome to Arizona." As she watched him ride away, the silhouette of horse and rider gradually disappearing into the darkness, Zara felt a strange mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. Closing the door, she surveyed her new home, lonely but full of possibility, much like the territory itself. She had no way of knowing that the broken wagon axle would be the first of many challenges she would face in this harsh but beautiful land, nor that the cowboy who had come to her aid would soon become central to her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The following days were a flurry of activity as Zara settled into her new home. She discovered that Uncle Joseph had left the place in reasonably good condition, though there was plenty of work to be done. The garden plot needed tending, the chicken coop required repairs, and the house itself needed a thorough cleaning after months of sitting empty. By the third day, she had established a routine rising at dawn to feed the 3 chickens she'd purchased from a neighboring farm, tending to Penny, and working on the endless list of chores until sunset. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, giving her little time to dwell on her loneliness or uncertainties. Late in the afternoon of her 4th day at the homestead, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Quartzsite. Even at a distance, she recognized Garrett's broad-shouldered silhouette, and she found herself smoothing her hair and brushing dust from her apron before stepping onto the porch to greet him. "Afternoon, Miss Calloway," he called, touching the brim of his hat as he drew closer. Behind his saddle was a wooden replacement axle carefully secured with rope. "Mr. Jameson," she replied with a smile. "Right on time," he dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all, I was just finishing up for the day." She gestured to the garden where she'd been clearing weeds. "Would you care for some coffee? It's fresh." Garrett accepted with a nod, following her into the house. Zara noticed that he'd cleaned up since their last meeting, his face freshly shaven, his clothes less dusty, his dark hair neatly combed beneath his hat. The observation caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. As she poured the coffee, she asked about his trip to town. "Uneventful," he replied, accepting the cup with thanks. "Picked up your axle from the blacksmith. Jackson sends his regards, says he remembers your uncle well." "It seems everyone knew Uncle Joseph except for me," she mused, sitting across from him at the table. "He was well respected, if somewhat private." Garrett took a sip of his coffee. "I noticed you've been busy around the place. The garden's looking better." "It needed attention," she said, pleased that he'd noticed. "I'm hoping to have vegetables by late summer if I'm not too late with the planting." They discussed her progress on the homestead, with Garrett offering practical advice about the property where the best firewood could be found, how to manage the water supply during the dry months, which local merchants were fair in their dealings. His knowledge was offered without condescension, and Zara found herself grateful for both the information and the company. After they finished their coffee, they headed outside to repair the wagon. Garrett unloaded the new axle while Zara gathered the necessary tools. Working together, they emptied the wagon and propped it up to remove the temporary repair. "Hand me that wrench," Garrett said, pointing to a tool on the ground beside her. As she passed it to him, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "You're quite handy with these repairs," she commented, trying to distract herself from the lingering sensation of his touch. "Grew up helping my father in his carpentry shop," he explained, loosening a bolt. "Before the war, that is. Learned to fix just about anything that could break on a ranch since coming west." They worked steadily through the afternoon, the Arizona heat causing perspiration to bead on their brows. Zara was conscious of Garrett's proximity as they maneuvered around the wagon, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the way he sometimes steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Tell me about the Triple Creek," she said as they worked. "How large is the operation?" "Fair-sized," he replied, adjusting the new axle into position. "About 3,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, owned by Wallace Thornton Goodman, fair boss. Started as a cattle hand there 5 years ago, worked my way up to foreman last year." "That's impressive," she said sincerely. Garrett shrugged, though she caught a hint of pride in his expression. "Just did the work that needed doing. Hold this steady for me, would you?" Zara grasped the axle where he indicated, their hands close together as he secured it with bolts. "What about family? Do you have any in the territory?" A shadow passed over his features. "Lost my parents before the war, had a brother who went to California during the gold rush, haven't heard from him in years." He tightened a bolt with perhaps more force than necessary. "The ranch hands at Triple Creek are the closest thing to family I have now." The simple honesty of his statement touched her. "I understand. Sometimes the family we find is more important than the one we're born to." He glanced up at her, something warming in his gaze. "Exactly so." By sunset, the wagon was repaired, the new axle securely in place. Garrett tested it by having Zara drive it in a circle while he watched for any issues with the alignment. Satisfied with their work, they stood beside the wagon in the fading light, a sense of accomplishment between them. "Good as new," he declared, wiping his hands on a rag. "Should serve you well for years to come." "I can't thank you enough," Zara said, reaching for her purse. "Please let me pay you for the axle and your time." Garrett waved away her offer. "No need, consider it a welcome to the territory." "At least stay for supper," she insisted. "I've got a rabbit stew that's been simmering all afternoon." The invitation hung between them, weighted with something neither was ready to acknowledge. After a moment, Garrett nodded. "I'd be obliged." Inside, Zara busied herself setting the table while Garrett washed up at the basin. The domesticity of the scene struck her how quickly they had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, how natural it felt to have him in her home. It was a dangerous thought, she knew. She'd come to Arizona to build a life on her own terms, not to become dependent on a man, no matter how kind or capable. Over dinner, their conversation flowed more easily than before. Garrett told her about the local ranchers and townspeople, painting a picture of the community she had joined. Zara shared stories of her life in Kansas City, her father's work as a banker, her mother's involvement with the Ladies' Aid Society. "What about you?" Garrett asked. "What did you do before coming west?" Zara hesitated, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. "I was a teacher for a time," she admitted, "at a small school in Kansas City." "A school teacher," interest sparked in his eyes. "Quartzsite could use one. The children here have to travel to Parker or Ehrenberg for schooling too far for many families." "I hadn't considered teaching here," she said thoughtfully. "I came to work the land to make my uncle's place productive again." "No reason you couldn't do both," he suggested. "Many folks here balance multiple responsibilities." The idea planted a seed in her mind, a way to connect with the community, to use skills she'd already developed. "Perhaps once I'm more settled," she conceded. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself increasingly aware of Garrett's presence, the deep timbre of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the careful respect with which he treated her and her home. It had been a long time since she'd felt so at ease with anyone. When it came time for him to leave, they stood again on the porch, the night alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. The moon hung full and bright overhead, illuminating the yard in silver light. "I've taken enough of your time," Garrett said, settling his hat on his head. "Thank you for the meal, best I've had in months." "Thank you for the axle," she replied, suddenly shy, "and the company." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "There's a social at the Thorntons' place this Saturday, nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering for music and conversation. You'd be welcome to join us, meet some of the local families." The invitation surprised her. "A social happens every few months. Good way to meet folks, make connections." His expression was earnest. "I could ride by around 4, escort you there if you'd like." Zara considered briefly. She had planned to spend the weekend working on the house, but the prospect of meeting her neighbors and spending more time with Garrett was undeniably appealing. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you for the invitation." A smile spread across his face, transforming his serious expression. "I'll see you Saturday, then." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Zara remained on the porch long after his figure disappeared into the darkness. The homestead suddenly felt emptier than before, the silence more pronounced in his absence. She turned to go inside, a mixture of anticipation and trepidation filling her chest. The social would be her first real introduction to the community, her chance to establish herself as more than just Joseph Harper's niece. And Garrett Jameson, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, would be by her side. The thought brought both comfort and confusion. She hadn't come to Arizona territory looking for a man's protection or companionship. Yet there was something about the cowboy that intrigued her, drawing her toward him despite her reservations. Shaking her head to clear these thoughts, Zara closed the door and prepared for bed. There was work to be done tomorrow, and dwelling on possibilities with a man she barely knew would only distract her from the independence she had sought in coming west. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with green eyes and the steady voice of a cowboy who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. Saturday arrived with unexpected nervousness for Zara. She spent the morning completing her chores with distracted efficiency, then devoted the afternoon to preparing herself for the social. She washed her hair with rosemary-scented soap, letting the dark brown waves dry in the Arizona sun. From her trunk, she selected her best dress, a cornflower blue cotton with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fashionable by Kansas City standards, but it was clean and becoming. As 4 o'clock approached, she found herself checking her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin more frequently than she cared to admit. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "It's just a neighborhood gathering." Yet when she heard hoofbeats approaching, her heart quickened traitorously. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the porch just as Garrett rode into the yard. He sat tall in the saddle, dressed in clean denims, a crisp white shirt, and a dark vest. His hat was the same, but his boots had been polished to a shine. Leading a second horse, a gentle-looking bay mare, he smiled at the sight of her. "Miss Calloway," he greeted, touching his hat brim. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Jameson," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "And thank you for arranging transportation. Thought you might prefer riding to taking the wagon," he explained, dismounting to help her with the mare. "This is Daisy, belongs to the Thornton family, but she's gentle as they come." Zara approached the mare, stroking her velvet nose. "Hello, Daisy." "Aren't you beautiful? Need a hand mounting?" Garrett asked, standing nearby. "I can manage, thank you." To demonstrate, she placed her foot in the stirrup and swung gracefully into the saddle, arranging her skirts modestly. "I grew up riding, one of the few freedoms my mother allowed me." Approval flashed in Garrett's eyes as he mounted his own horse. Ready then, they rode side by side across the desert landscape, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the scrubland. Garrett pointed out landmarks along the way, a distinctive rock formation, a stand of cottonwoods marking a seasonal creek, distant mountains with names she tried to commit to memory. "That's Granite Mountain to the north," he explained, pointing to a rugged peak. "Good landmark if you ever get turned around out here. It's so different from Kansas," Zara observed, taking in the stark beauty around them. "Less green, but more colorful in other ways. The rocks, the sky, even the plants have their own beauty." "Takes some getting used to," Garrett agreed. "But once the desert gets in your blood, no other place quite compares." As they approached the Triple Creek Ranch, Zara could see it was substantially larger than her modest homestead. A 2-story main house stood proudly amid several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. A creek, the ranch's namesake, wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. Already, several wagons and horses were gathered near the house, and the sound of a fiddle drifted on the air. "How many people will be here?" Zara asked, suddenly apprehensive. 20, maybe 30, Garrett replied. "Ranchers and their families from within riding distance, some folks from town." Sensing her nervousness, he added, "Don't worry, they're good people, curious about newcomers but welcoming." They dismounted near the barn, where a young ranch hand took charge of their horses. Garrett offered his arm to Zara, a gesture both formal and reassuring. After only a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, allowing him to escort her toward the gathering. The Thorntons' yard had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from tree branches, trestle tables laden with food stood in the shade, and a cleared area served as a dance floor where several couples were already moving to the lively music of a fiddle and banjo. "Garrett, there you are." A robust man with silver-streaked dark hair approached them, his face creased with smile lines. "And you must be Miss Calloway. Welcome to Triple Creek." "Miss Calloway, this is Wallace Thornton," Garrett introduced, "my employer and the finest rancher in La Paz County." "You're too kind to an old cattleman," Thornton laughed, offering his hand to Zara. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Calloway. Your uncle was a good neighbor and friend." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Thornton," Zara replied, shaking his hand. "It's lovely to meet you." "Come, let me introduce you to my wife, Margaret," Wallace said, gesturing toward a dignified woman in a green dress who was directing young men in the placement of chairs. "She's been eager to meet Joseph Harper's niece." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, as Zara met the families of the surrounding ranches and farms. Margaret Thornton proved to be a warm, motherly woman who promised to call on Zara the following week. The Davis family, who ran the general store in Quartzsite, invited her to visit anytime. The Millers, whose property adjoined hers to the north, offered to help with her garden and shared tips about which crops thrived in the local soil. Throughout it all, Garrett remained by her side, a steady presence that anchored her amid the sea of new faces and names. He seemed well respected by the community, with men seeking his opinion on ranch matters and women casting appreciative glances his way, a fact that Zara noted with an unexpected twinge of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy. "You're quite popular," she observed when they finally had a moment alone by the refreshment table. Garrett shrugged, looking somewhat uncomfortable with her assessment. "People are just friendly." "Especially the Peterson sisters," Zara couldn't help adding, nodding toward two young women who had been particularly attentive to him earlier. A flush crept up his neck. "Clara and Beth are nice girls," he said diplomatically. "Their father runs the livery in town." "And they clearly think very highly of you," she persisted, surprised at her own boldness. Garrett's eyes met hers, a hint of amusement in their depths. "Is that concern I hear, Miss Calloway, or interest?" Now it was Zara's turn to blush. "Merely an observation, Mr. Jameson." Before he could respond, the fiddle struck up a new tune, a lively reel that had couples quickly forming lines on the dance floor. "Would you care to dance?" Garrett asked, offering his hand. Zara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd be delighted." The dance was energetic, requiring concentration and quick footwork as they moved in time with the music. Garrett proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with confidence. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, his grip on her fingers steady and warm. Zara found herself laughing as they turned and stepped, caught up in the joy of movement after days of solitary work. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Garrett drew her closer, still maintaining a proper distance, but near enough that she could detect the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. They moved together with surprising grace, their steps falling into natural harmony. "You dance well," he commented, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My father insisted on dancing lessons," she replied, looking up to meet his gaze. "He said a lady should know how to move with dignity across a ballroom floor." "He was right," Garrett said, his eyes never leaving hers as they turned in time with the music. "Though I doubt he imagined his daughter waltzing at a ranch social in Arizona territory." "Life rarely follows the path we expect," she said softly, thinking of all the changes the past year had brought. "No," he agreed, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes it offers something better than we could have planned." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. They continued to dance, each acutely aware of the other, until the music ended and reality reasserted itself in the form of enthusiastic applause for the musicians. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself relaxing into the warmth of the community. These people were different from those she had known in Kansas City, less concerned with social niceties, more direct in their speech and manner, but genuinely kind and helpful in their offers of assistance and advice for the new arrival. Near sunset, as lanterns were lit around the yard, Margaret Thornton approached Zara with a meaningful look. "My dear, I wonder if I might have a word with you." Excusing herself from a conversation with the local doctor and his wife, Zara followed Margaret to a quieter corner of the gathering. The older woman's expression was kind but serious. "I hope you're enjoying yourself," Margaret began, adjusting her shawl around her shoulders. "It's not often we get new faces at these gatherings." "Very much so," Zara assured her. "Everyone has been most welcoming." "Good, good." Margaret glanced across the yard to where Garrett stood talking with Wallace and several other men. "I couldn't help but notice that you arrived with our Garrett." Zara felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "Mr. Jameson was kind enough to escort me. I'm still learning my way around the territory." "He's a good man," Margaret said, her tone measured. "One of the finest Wallace has ever employed, trustworthy, hardworking, respected by all who know him." "I've found him to be very helpful," Zara replied carefully, unsure where the conversation was heading. Margaret's expression softened. What I'm trying to say, my dear, is that I approve. Garrett has been alone too long, and while he would never admit it, Wallace and I have worried about him. It does my heart good to see him taking an interest. Mrs. Thornton, I assure you, Mr. Jameson and I are merely neighbors. Margaret supplied with a knowing smile. Of course, for now, but I've been watching the two of you this evening and I recognize the signs. Just know that you have our blessing should things progress. Before Zara could formulate a response to this surprising declaration, Margaret patted her hand and moved away to attend to other guests, leaving her with tumultuous thoughts. Was she truly developing feelings for Garrett Jameson? And more unsettlingly, was it so obvious that others had noticed? She had come to Arizona to establish her independence, not to fall under the protection of another man, no matter how appealing he might be. She was still pondering these questions when Garrett approached, 2 cups of lemonade in hand. You look deep in thought, he observed, offering her one of the cups. Just processing all the new faces and names, she replied, accepting the drink gratefully. Mrs. Thornton is quite perceptive. That she is, he agreed with a slight smile. Whatever she said seems to have unsettled you. Zara took a sip of lemonade, buying time. She was very kind, she said finally. She and her husband seem to think highly of you. They've been good to me, he acknowledged, his gaze steady on her face. Like family in many ways. The simple statement reminded her of his earlier confession that the ranch hands were the closest thing to family he had now. It softened something in her, this glimpse of the lonely man behind the capable cowboy exterior. It's getting late, Garrett noted, looking at the darkening sky. We should start back before full dark if you're ready. Though part of her wished to stay longer in this warm circle of community, Zara nodded. I am a bit tired, she admitted. It's been a while since I've socialized so much. They made their farewells, with promises to visit and invitations to return. Margaret embraced Zara warmly, whispering, Remember what I said, dear, while Wallace shook Garrett's hand with a meaningful look that Zara pretended not to notice. The ride home was quieter than their journey to the ranch, both lost in their own thoughts as they traversed the moonlit desert. The night had turned cool, and Zara found herself grateful for the shawl she had brought. Did you enjoy yourself? Garrett asked as they neared her property. Very much, she replied honestly. Everyone was so kind, I wasn't expecting such a warm welcome. People look out for each other here, he said. Life in the territory is hard enough without isolation. They reached her homestead, the small house dark and silent against the starlit sky. Garrett dismounted first, then moved to help her from her horse. His hands at her waist were strong and sure as he lifted her down, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. Thank you for escorting me, Zara said, suddenly shy in the intimate darkness. And for introducing me to your community. Our community now, he corrected gently. And it was my pleasure. They stood facing each other in the yard, the horses stamping softly behind them, the night alive with the sounds of the desert. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken words, unacknowledged feelings that had been building since that first chance encounter on the dusty road. Zara, Garrett began, his voice lower than usual. Whatever he had been about to say, was interrupted by a sudden noise from the direction of the corral, a startled whinny from Penny, and the distinctive rattling sound that every Westerner recognized with dread. Rattlesnake, Garrett said sharply, pushing Zara behind him as he drew his revolver. Stay back! He moved cautiously toward the corral, where Penny was dancing nervously away from one corner. In the moonlight, they could make out the coiled form of a rattlesnake, its warning clearly audible in the night air. Garrett aimed carefully and fired, the shot echoing across the silent landscape. The snake's rattling ceased abruptly. Is it dead? Zara asked, her heart pounding from the sudden danger. Yes, he confirmed, holstering his weapon after ensuring the threat was eliminated. But there might be others. Let me check the yard and porch before you go in. He moved methodically around the property, checking dark corners and potential hiding places while Zara waited anxiously by the horses. Finally, satisfied that no other dangers lurked nearby, he returned to her side. All clear, he reported, but you'll want to be careful for the next few days. Where there's one rattler, there are often others." The encounter had shattered the delicate moment between them, replacing it with practical concerns for her safety. Zara nodded, grateful for his protection but disappointed by the interruption. "I should get inside," she said, glancing at the dark house. "And you have a ride ahead of you." Garrett nodded, though she thought she detected reluctance in his expression. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right. Make sure there are no more uninvited guests." "I'd appreciate that," she replied sincerely. He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly, the contact sending warmth spreading through her despite its brevity. "Good night, Zara." "Lock your door." "Good night, Garrett," she whispered, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away with Daisy in tow, his silhouette gradually fading into the darkness. Inside, Zara lit a lamp and secured the door as instructed, her mind replaying the events of the evening, the dancing, Margaret Thornton's knowing looks, and most of all, the unfinished moment in the yard before the rattlesnake's interruption. What had Garrett been about to say? As she prepared for bed, she acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was developing feelings for the quiet cowboy who had entered her life so unexpectedly. Whether it was wise to pursue those feelings was another matter entirely. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was that independence didn't necessarily mean being alone. Perhaps there was a way to maintain her autonomy while still opening her heart to the possibility of companionship, if only with the right person. The following weeks brought a rhythm to Zara's life that was both challenging and satisfying. Her garden began to show promising signs of life, with seedlings breaking through the soil in neat rows. The chicken coop was repaired, and she had added 3 more hens to her small flock, providing a steady supply of fresh eggs. The house itself was becoming more of a home with each passing day as she arranged her belongings and added small touches to make the space her own. But the most significant change was Garrett's increasing presence in her life. True to his word, he had returned the day after the social to check for more rattlesnakes, finding and dispatching 2 more near the woodpile. That visit had led to another, then another, until it became natural to expect him every few days, sometimes with supplies from town, sometimes offering help with repairs around the property, but always with that quiet steadiness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. They settled into a comfortable pattern. Garrett would arrive in the late afternoon after his duties at Triple Creek were complete and stay until sunset. They would work side by side on whatever project needed attention, mending fences, reinforcing the roof of the outbuilding, digging irrigation channels for the garden. Afterward, they would share a meal on the porch, talking as the desert day cooled into evening. Through these conversations, Zara learned more about the man behind the capable exterior. She discovered that he loved to read, particularly history and poetry, though he was self-conscious about his education, which had been interrupted by the war. She learned that he could play the harmonica, a skill he demonstrated one evening with a haunting rendition of Shenandoah that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. In turn, she shared her own stories, her childhood in Kansas City, her brief teaching career, her dreams of building something meaningful on this piece of desert land. Garrett listened with genuine interest, offering neither judgment nor unsolicited advice, simply accepting her as she was. It was during one of these evening conversations, about a month after the social, that Garrett finally asked the question that had been lingering between them. "Why did you really come to Arizona, Zara?" His voice was gentle in the gathering dusk. "It can't have been easy, leaving everything familiar behind." She was silent for a long moment, considering her answer. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Kansas City except memories and expectations. I was unmarried at 24, which made me an object of pity in our social circle. The eligible men who had shown interest before suddenly seemed more attracted to my father's modest estate than to me." Garrett's expression darkened at this, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "When I learned about Uncle Joseph's property, it seemed like Providence, a chance to build something that was entirely mine, to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms." She looked out across the darkening landscape. I wanted freedom more than security, I suppose. And now?" He asked quietly, "Do you regret your choice?" Zara turned to him, meeting his gaze directly. "Not for a moment. It's harder than I imagined and lonelier at times, but there's a satisfaction in this life that I never found in Kansas City." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, relief, perhaps, or understanding. "You're stronger than most men I know," he said simply. "Braver, too." His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "What about you?" she asked. "Why stay in one place after years of wandering? Mr. Thornton mentioned you worked your way across Texas and New Mexico before settling here." Garrett was quiet for so long that she wondered if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was reflective. "After the war, I couldn't seem to find peace anywhere. Kept moving, taking whatever work I could find, never staying long enough to put down roots." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, the gesture somehow vulnerable. Triple Creek was just supposed to be another stop along the way. But something about this place, the land, the people, it started to feel like home. For the first time since before the war, I could imagine a future. The simple honesty of his confession touched her deeply. On impulse, she reached across the space between them, placing her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "I'm glad you stayed," she said softly. Garrett turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining with natural ease. "So am I," he replied, his eyes holding hers in the fading light. They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled around them, neither willing to break the moment by speaking. When Garrett finally rose to leave, reluctance was evident in every line of his body. "I've been meaning to ask you," he said, settling his hat on his head. "The Founders' Day celebration is coming up in Quartzsite next weekend. There'll be a dance, a picnic, various competitions. I'd be honored if you'd attend with me." The formal invitation brought a smile to Zara's lips. "As your neighbor, or is this a more official arrangement, Mr. Jameson?" A slow smile spread across his face, warming his green eyes. "I believe Miss Peterson would call it courting if we were to put a name to it." The directness of his response caught her by surprise, sending a flutter of both excitement and apprehension through her chest. "Are you courting me, Garrett Jameson?" "If you'll allow it," he replied, his expression suddenly serious. "I've developed feelings for you, Zara, feelings I hadn't expected and didn't think I was capable of anymore. I understand your desire for independence, and I respect it, but I'd like the chance to show you that companionship doesn't have to mean surrender." His words echoed her own thoughts so closely that it momentarily robbed her of speech. When she found her voice, it was steadier than she had expected. "I would like that very much." The smile that transformed his face was worth any uncertainty she might have felt. "Then I'll call for you Saturday morning," he said, reaching out to touch her cheek briefly. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Garrett," she replied, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away into the darkness. Inside the house, Zara leaned against the closed door, her heart racing with emotions too complex to name. She had come to Arizona seeking independence, determined to build a life without relying on anyone else. Yet here she was, considering a relationship with a man she had known for just over a month. But Garrett wasn't like the men she had known in Kansas City, with their calculated interest and veiled expectations. He had never treated her as anything less than an equal, never suggested that her ambitions were improper or her independence unbecoming. Instead, he had offered help without demanding gratitude, companionship without expecting submission. For the first time, Zara allowed herself to imagine a future that included both her independence and Garrett Jameson. It was a startling thought, but not an unwelcome one. With that realization warming her heart, she prepared for bed, her mind already turning to the upcoming Founders' Day celebration and what it might mean for their evolving relationship. Founders' Day dawned bright and clear, the Arizona sky a flawless blue canvas stretched above the desert landscape. Zara had risen early, too excited to sleep, and spent extra time on her appearance. For the occasion, she had chosen her best dress, a sage green cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, paired with the cameo brooch that had been her mother's. When Garrett arrived, driving a smart buggy rather than riding horseback, Zara felt a flutter of pleasure at the effort he had made. He was dressed in his Sunday best dark trousers, a clean white shirt, and a black vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hat was new, or at least unfamiliar to her, and his boots had been polished to a mirror shine. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she stepped onto the porch. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You're quite handsome yourself." He offered his hand to help her into the buggy, the touch sending a now familiar warmth through her. As they set off toward town, Zara found herself stealing glances at his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way the morning sun caught the golden flecks in his green eyes. "Something on your mind?" Garrett asked, catching one of these glances. "Just thinking how different my life is now from what I expected when I left Kansas City," she admitted. In the best possible way. His smile was worth the confession. Change can be a blessing given the right circumstances. The ride to Quartzsite passed quickly as they discussed the day ahead. Founded in the 1860s as a mining community, Quartzsite had evolved into an important stop along the freight route between California and the rest of Arizona Territory. The Founders' Day celebration was the town's largest annual event, drawing people from miles around for a day of festivities. As they approached, Zara could see that the normally quiet settlement was transformed. The main street was festooned with bunting in red, white, and blue. Tables had been set up in the shade of cottonwood trees for the community picnic. A temporary dance floor had been constructed near the town hall, where musicians were already tuning their instruments. People in their Sunday finery moved from one attraction to another, greeting neighbors and friends with the easy familiarity of a close-knit community. Garrett found a place to tie the buggy near the general store, then offered Zara his arm. "Shall we join the festivities?" The day was a whirlwind of activities and introductions. Zara met so many people that their names began to blur together, though each welcomed her warmly as Joseph Harper's niece, and Garrett's young lady, a designation that brought a blush to her cheeks but no desire to correct. They watched shooting competitions and horse races, applauded as children recited patriotic poems, and joined in the community picnic at midday. Throughout it all, Garrett remained attentive but not possessive, introducing her proudly but allowing her to form her own impressions and connections. As the afternoon wore on, Zara found herself deep in conversation with several local women about the possibility of establishing regular schooling in Quartzsite. "The nearest proper school is 20 miles away," explained Martha Davis, the storekeeper's wife. "Many families simply can't manage the journey daily, especially during the winter months. It's a tragedy," added Eliza Miller, whose farm bordered Zara's property. "My Jacob can barely write his name, and he's 12. We do what we can at home, but with the farm and 5 younger children." "Have you approached the territorial government?" Zara asked, her interest piqued by the genuine need she sensed. "Several times," Martha sighed. "They say there aren't enough children to justify a teacher's salary, but if we had someone already here, someone qualified." The women exchanged meaningful glances, and Zara realized they were referring to her. "I see," she said, considering. "I did enjoy teaching in Kansas City, but I've only just begun establishing my homestead. No one expects you to abandon your property," Eliza assured her quickly. "Perhaps 2 or 3 days a week in the town hall. We could arrange fair compensation from the families." The idea took root in Zara's mind, a way to use her skills while remaining independent, to become truly part of this community while maintaining her own home and land. "Let me think on it," she said finally. "It's certainly worth considering." The women nodded, satisfied with this response, and the conversation moved to other topics. But the seed had been planted, and Zara found herself imagining the possibilities as the afternoon progressed. As sunset approached, the dance began in earnest. Lanterns were lit around the temporary dance floor, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form lines for the first dance. "May I have this dance, Miss Calloway?" Garrett asked formally, offering his hand. "You may indeed, Mr. Jameson," she replied with equal formality, though her eyes sparkled with amusement as she placed her hand in his. They moved together with the same natural harmony they had discovered at the Triple Creek Social, but there was a new awareness between them now, an acknowledged attraction that made each touch more meaningful, each shared glance more intimate. As the evening progressed, they danced every dance together, ignoring the knowing smiles of the townspeople and the occasional good-natured teasing from Garrett's fellow ranch hands. For these precious hours, they existed in a world of their own making, defined by music, movement, and the growing connection between them. During a brief pause while the musicians rested, Garrett led Zara away from the crowded dance floor toward a quieter spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice low and intimate in the relative privacy of their position. "More than I can say," she replied honestly. "Everyone has been so welcoming. I feel as though I've known these people for years rather than weeks. They recognize quality when they see it," Garrett said, his gaze steady on her face. "Just as I did that day on the road when your axle broke." The simple statement brought warmth to her cheeks. "I'm still not entirely convinced that was mere coincidence," she admitted. "It seems too providential that you should be the one to find me when I needed help most. Are you suggesting divine intervention, Miss Calloway?" There was amusement in his tone, but his eyes remained serious. "Perhaps," she replied thoughtfully, "or perhaps just extraordinary good fortune." Garrett's expression softened. "Either way, I'm grateful for that broken axle. Without it, who knows if our paths would have crossed." The thought sent an unexpected chill through her, the idea that they might never have met, that she might be living on her homestead alone, without knowing what she now knew about Garrett Jameson and the feelings he stirred within her. "As am I," she said softly. He moved closer then, one hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Zara," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other long, but Garrett, there you are." Wallace Thornton's booming voice interrupted whatever he had been about to say. "They're about to announce the shooting competition winners, and you're expected at the podium." Garrett dropped his hand, frustration briefly visible in his expression before he schooled his features into a polite smile. "Of course, Mr. Thornton, we'll be right there." Wallace glanced between them, realization dawning on his face. "I've interrupted something, haven't I? Margaret will have my hide. Take your time, the announcements can wait a few minutes." With an apologetic nod to Zara, he retreated toward the town center. "It seems we're destined to be interrupted at crucial moments," Garrett said with a rueful smile once they were alone again. "Perhaps it's for the best," Zara replied, though her heart disagreed. "We should rejoin the celebration." Disappointment flickered in his eyes, but he nodded, offering his arm once more. "After you, Miss Calloway." The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of music, conversation, and shared glances that spoke volumes without words. When the final dance ended shortly before midnight, Zara found herself reluctant for the day to end, despite her physical exhaustion. The drive back to her homestead was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts as the buggy moved steadily through the moonlit desert. Stars carpeted the sky above, brilliant without the competition of town lights, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "I think we might have weather coming," Garrett observed, glancing at the western horizon where clouds were gathering. "I hope so," Zara replied, following his gaze. "The garden could use a good soaking." They reached her property just as the first distant rumble of thunder sounded across the desert. Garrett helped her from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Together they walked to the porch, both keenly aware that the day was ending and with it, perhaps, the magic that had surrounded them. "Thank you for today," Zara said, turning to face him at her door. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more." "The pleasure was mine," Garrett replied, his voice low and sincere. He hesitated, then added, "Zara, what I was trying to say earlier before we were interrupted." Her heart quickened as she waited, acutely conscious of his proximity, the earnestness in his expression, the way the approaching storm seemed to charge the air between them with electricity. "I've fallen in love with you," he said simply. the words hanging in the night air between them. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon for you to feel the same, but I wanted you to know my intentions are honorable, and my feelings are sincere. The declaration, so straightforward and unembellished, was perfectly in keeping with everything she had come to know about Garrett Jameson. No flowery speeches or grand gestures, just honest emotion expressed with quiet dignity. "Garrett," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever she had been about to say was lost as the skies opened above them, rain suddenly pouring down with the intensity that only desert storms could muster. Within seconds, they were both soaked, water streaming from the brim of Garrett's hat and plastering Zara's dress to her skin. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other in shock. Then, simultaneously, they began to laugh deep, genuine laughter at the absurdity of the moment and the timing of the cloudburst. "Perhaps we're not meant to have this conversation without divine intervention," Garrett suggested, still chuckling as he removed his sodden hat. "Or perhaps we're being told not to waste words when actions speak more clearly," Zara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Before she could reconsider, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Rising onto her toes, she pressed her lips gently to his in a kiss that was both a question and an answer. Garrett froze for the briefest moment, then responded with restrained passion, one hand coming up to cradle her cheek while the other remained respectfully at his side. The kiss was tender but charged with emotion, deepening for one breathless moment before they slowly parted. "I believe I've fallen in love with you too, Garrett Jameson," Zara admitted, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Though I had no intention of doing so when I came to Arizona." The smile that transformed his face was worth any uncertainty she might have felt. Rain continued to pour down around them, but neither made a move to seek shelter, too caught up in the moment and its significance. "Life rarely follows our intentions," Garrett said, echoing her earlier sentiment from the dance. His hand still cradled her cheek, thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "But sometimes it leads us exactly where we need to be." Another kiss followed, deeper than the first, a sealing of the feelings they had acknowledged. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Zara was acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation alone on her porch, soaked to the skin in each other's arms. "You should come inside and dry off before you head back," she suggested, mindful of propriety despite her racing heart. "The storm looks to be settling in for the night." Garrett glanced at the torrential rain, then back at her with concern. "I should go." "Your reputation can withstand you drying off by my fire before riding home in a downpour," she interrupted firmly. "Besides, no one will know but us." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, following her into the house. Zara lit a lamp and built up the banked fire while Garrett removed his wet jacket and hung it near the hearth to dry. They maintained a careful distance from each other, both aware of the implications of his presence in her home after midnight. "I'll make some coffee," Zara offered, moving toward the kitchen area. "Thank you," Garrett replied, his voice rougher than usual as he stood by the fire. "I didn't plan for this evening to end this way." She glanced back at him, noting the sincerity in his expression, the careful way he held himself away from her private spaces. "I believe you," she said simply. "Your honor is one of the many reasons I've come to care for you." While the coffee brewed, they talked of safer topics, the events of the day, the neighbors they had met, the possibility of Zara teaching in quartzsite. The normality of the conversation helped ease the tension, though both were acutely aware of the shifted dynamic between them. When his clothes had dried sufficiently, Garrett reluctantly prepared to leave, despite the continuing storm. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he said, donning his hat, and the rains lightened a bit. At the door, he turned to her once more. "Zara, I meant what I said earlier. I love you and my intentions are honorable. I don't want to rush you, but I hope you'll consider a future that includes me." Zara reached up to touch his cheek, her heart full of emotions she was only beginning to understand. "I will," she promised, "but I need time, Garrett. This is all happening so quickly and I came here seeking independence." "I understand," he assured her, covering her hand with his own. "Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." With a final kiss, gentle and restrained, he stepped out into the rain and made his way to where the buggy waited. Zara watched from the doorway until he disappeared into the stormy night, her mind and heart racing with the events of the day and the possibilities they had opened before her. The weeks that followed were a time of transformation both for Zara's homestead and for her relationship with Garrett. The summer rains brought new life to the desert, turning the landscape a surprising green and helping her garden flourish. Her work on the property continued with renewed vigor, fueled by a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. Garrett's visits became more regular, though always conducted with propriety. He would arrive in the late afternoon, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry she had mentioned enjoying, seeds for her garden, a harmonica of her own that he patiently taught her to play. They would work side by side on various projects, share a meal on the porch, and talk until twilight, when he would leave with a lingering kiss and promises to return soon. Their courtship progressed with the steady, unhurried pace that characterized everything about Garrett Jameson. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made demands or assumptions about their future. Instead, he demonstrated his love through consistent presence, practical support, and profound respect for her independence. In mid-August, Zara began teaching 3 days a week in Quartzsite, using the town hall as a makeshift schoolroom. The arrangement worked better than she had anticipated. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, she would ride into town to teach children of various ages the fundamentals of reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. The other days were devoted to her homestead, which continued to improve under her careful attention. Garrett fully supported her teaching, often adjusting his own schedule to ride with her to and from town on the days she taught. "You're bringing something valuable to the community," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch after a long day. "Those children need education if they're going to have opportunities beyond the territory. It's fulfilling in a way I hadn't expected," she admitted, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "I feel useful, not just to myself but to others." "That's the true measure of a life well lived," Garrett observed thoughtfully. "Being of use to those around you." It was these moments of shared philosophy, of deep understanding, that strengthened Zara's growing certainty about her feelings for him. Garrett wasn't just a handsome face or a set of capable hands. He was a man of substance, of thought and feeling, whose values aligned with her own in ways that continuously surprised and delighted her. As summer began its transition to fall, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets, Zara found herself thinking more seriously about the future that increasingly included Garrett Jameson. The independence she had sought in coming west remained important to her, but she no longer saw it as incompatible with loving and being loved by the right person. One evening in early September, as they sat on her porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Zara decided it was time to broach the subject that had been on her mind. "Garrett," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." He turned toward her, his expression attentive. "I'm listening." "When I came to Arizona, I was determined to build a life on my own terms, to prove that I didn't need anyone else to survive and thrive." She met his gaze directly. "That independence is still important to me and always will be." "As it should be," he agreed, though a shadow of uncertainty crossed his features. "You've accomplished more in a few months than many men do in years. But I've come to realize something," she continued. "Independence doesn't have to mean solitude. It doesn't have to mean facing every challenge alone when there's someone willing to stand beside you rather than in front of you." Hope began to replace the uncertainty in his expression. "Zara, let me finish," she said gently, placing her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "You've never once made me feel that my dreams or ambitions were secondary to yours. You've supported my teaching, my work on this homestead, my desire to establish myself in this community on my own merits. You've offered help without expecting control, companionship without demanding submission." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what came next. "I love you, Garrett Jameson, and I believe we could build something remarkable together, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than traditional expectations of husband and wife. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, gradual, then brilliant in its intensity. "Are you proposing to me, Zara Calloway?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his tone despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I suppose I am," she replied with a small laugh. "Though I'd hoped for a more graceful delivery." In one fluid motion, Garrett slid from the bench to kneel before her, still holding her hand in his. "Then allow me to respond in the traditional manner," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Zara Calloway, I have loved you since that first day on the dusty road when you faced a broken wagon with determination rather than despair. I love your strength, your intelligence, your unwavering commitment to your principles. I would be honored beyond words if you would consent to be my wife, my partner in all things, for as long as we both shall live." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. Garrett reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect emerald. "It was my mother's. Green, like the new growth after desert rain, a symbol of possibility and renewal." "It's beautiful," Zara whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Garrett rose from his kneeling position to sit beside her once more, gathering her into his arms with gentle reverence. "I promise you this, Zara, I will never ask you to be less than who you are. Your dreams will be my dreams, your ambitions my cause for pride. We will build our life together as equals or not at all." "I believe you," she said simply, because it was true. In all the time she had known him, Garrett Jameson had never given her reason to doubt his word or his intentions. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, tender at first, then deepening with the certainty of their commitment. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their eyes shining with shared joy and anticipation. "When?" Garrett asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand where the ring now rested. "October," Zara decided. "After the harvest. We could be married here with our friends and neighbors as witnesses." "October it is," he agreed, smiling, "a beautiful time of year for new beginnings." They spent the remainder of the evening discussing practical matters where they would live. They decided on her homestead, which was larger than his quarters at Triple Creek. How they would balance their respective responsibilities. He would continue as foreman while helping with her property. She would maintain her teaching position in town, when they would speak to Reverend Thompson about performing the ceremony. When Garrett finally left that night, his departure was different, infused with the certainty of their shared future, the promise of a lifetime of evenings that wouldn't have to end with goodbyes. Zara watched him ride away, the emerald ring gleaming on her finger in the moonlight, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Margaret Thornton was the first to call, arriving the very next day with embraces and offers of assistance with wedding preparations. "I knew from the moment I saw you together at the social," she declared triumphantly. "A mother knows these things, even for those who aren't her own children." The women of Quartzsite were equally enthusiastic, organizing a quilting bee to create a wedding gift and offering advice on everything from household management to the intricacies of married life, some of which made Zara blush to the roots of her hair. September passed in a whirlwind of preparations alongside the usual work of the homestead and her teaching duties. Garrett visited daily now, often staying for supper and lingering until the last possible moment before propriety demanded his departure. Together, they planned their future, dreamed aloud about the improvements they would make to the property, and occasionally simply sat in companionable silence, marveling at the path that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that day on the road?" Zara asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built for her as an engagement gift. "When my wagon axle broke, often," Garrett admitted, his arm around her shoulders as they swayed gently. "I was supposed to be heading in the opposite direction that day. Wallace had asked me to check the north pasture, but something told me to take the quartzsite road instead. Providence, Zara murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. Or extraordinary good fortune, he replied, echoing her words from the night of the Founders' Day dance. Either way, I thank God daily for broken wagon axles and stubborn women who insist on traveling alone. She laughed, nudging him playfully. And I thank him for cowboys who appear when needed and stay when wanted. As October approached, final preparations for the wedding intensified. Zara ordered fabric from Prescott for a new dress, which Margaret and several other women helped her sew during evenings filled with conversation and laughter. Garrett, with the help of fellow ranch hands, built an extension onto the house, a larger bedroom, and a dedicated study where Zara could prepare her lessons, and they could both enjoy the books they loved. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected letter arrived from Kansas City, a response to one Zara had sent months earlier to her mother's closest friend, informing her of the engagement. The letter contained not only warm congratulations, but also news that a small inheritance from her mother's family had finally been settled and would be forwarded to her in Arizona. "It's not a fortune," Zara explained to Garrett that evening as they discussed the letter. "But it's enough to make some significant improvements to the property. Perhaps a proper irrigation system for the garden, or expanding the chicken coop into a proper henhouse. Or hiring help for the heavier work," Garrett suggested. "So you can focus on your teaching and the parts of the homestead you most enjoy." The fact that his first thought was for her comfort and convenience rather than control of the unexpected funds only confirmed Zara's certainty that she had chosen well. In the short time she had known him, Garrett had demonstrated repeatedly that his concern was for her happiness, not his authority. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect October morning with the desert stretching golden and peaceful in all directions. Zara stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in hues of rose and amber, a sense of profound rightness settling over her. Margaret arrived early, bringing with her not only her husband but also Clara Peterson, who had proven to be a talented seamstress and had helped finish Zara's wedding dress. The women helped Zara prepare while Wallace went to meet Garrett and the other men at the temporary pavilion that had been erected in the yard for the ceremony and celebration. "You look beautiful, my dear," Margaret declared as she secured the final button on Zara's dress, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Clara arranged Zara's dark hair in a crown of braids interwoven with small white flowers gathered from the desert that morning. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked, adjusting a final flower. "Not about marrying Garrett," Zara replied honestly, "only about speaking my vows in front of so many people." It seemed the entire community had turned out for the occasion. As Zara peered through the window, she could see wagons and horses gathered around the property, people in their Sunday best moving toward the pavilion where Reverend Thompson waited with his Bible. A makeshift band, fiddle, guitar, and harmonica played softly near the refreshment tables that had been set up in the shade of a large mesquite tree. And there, standing tall and straight at the front of the gathering, was Garrett, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other in uncharacteristic nervousness. "It's time," Margaret announced, checking the small watch pinned to her dress. "Are you ready, my dear?" Zara nodded, a sense of calm certainty replacing any last-minute doubts. This was right, this man, this place, this life they would build together. She had come to Arizona seeking independence, and had found something equally valuable, a partner who respected that independence while offering the strength of shared purpose. Wallace waited at the front door to escort her to the pavilion, his weathered face creased in a paternal smile as she appeared. "You look radiant, Miss Calloway," he said, offering his arm. "Garrett is a fortunate man indeed." "Thank you for standing in for my father today," Zara replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. The Thorntons had become like family to her in the months since her arrival, their kindness and support unwavering. "The honor is mine," Wallace assured her, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. The short walk to the pavilion seemed both endless and too brief. Faces turned toward her as she approached friends, neighbors, students from her classes in town, all smiling with genuine happiness for the occasion. But Zara had eyes only for Garrett, whose expression as he watched her approach was one of such naked adoration that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. When Wallace placed her hand in Garrett's at the front of the gathering, the connection between them was like a current of electricity, vibrant, powerful, sustaining. His fingers closed around hers with gentle strength, his eyes never leaving her face as Reverend Thompson began the ceremony. The vows they spoke were traditional, but infused with personal meaning by the sincerity with which they were offered. When Garrett slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his voice rough with emotion. When Zara placed a matching band on his finger, her voice was clear and certain, her heart full to overflowing. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared, beaming at the couple before him. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jameson." Garrett's kiss was tender but publicly restrained, a promise of deeper intimacies to come. When they turned to face their assembled friends and neighbors, cheers erupted from the gathering, led enthusiastically by Wallace Thornton's booming voice. The celebration that followed was joyous and heartfelt, a feast of shared dishes contributed by neighbors, music and dancing that continued well into the afternoon, toasts and well wishes from all quarters. Garrett remained by Zara's side throughout, his hand rarely leaving hers, his eyes returning to her face again and again as if to reassure himself that this was real, that she was truly his wife. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, guests gradually departed with final congratulations and knowing smiles. The Thorntons were the last to leave, Margaret embracing Zara warmly while Wallace clapped Garrett on the shoulder with fatherly pride. "Be happy, my dears," Margaret said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "You deserve every joy." When the final wagon had disappeared down the road, Zara and Garrett stood hand in hand in the yard, watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared contentment and anticipation. "Mrs. Jameson," Garrett said finally, testing the name with evident pleasure. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," Zara replied honestly, leaning into his side. "Though I may continue to use Calloway for my teaching, the children are used to it." "Whatever you prefer," he agreed easily, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Your name doesn't change who you are." It was such a simple statement, yet it embodied everything that had drawn her to him: his respect for her identity, his understanding of her need for continuity in her professional life, his unwavering support of her choices. "I love you, Garrett Jameson," she said, turning within the circle of his arms to look up at him. "More than I ever thought possible when my wagon axle broke on that dusty road." His smile was tender as he traced the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "And I love you, Zara Jameson. More with each passing day." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they walked together toward the house, their house now, a shared space that would witness the unfolding of their life together. At the door, Garrett surprised her by sweeping her into his arms with easy strength. "I believe this is traditional," he explained with a smile that held both shyness and desire. Zara laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her across the threshold. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition on special occasions." The door closed behind them on the gathering darkness, enclosing them in the warm lamplight of home, a home built on mutual respect and shared dreams, on independence balanced with interdependence, on love that had blossomed unexpectedly from a chance encounter on an Arizona road. Outside, the desert night settled around the homestead where two lives had become one, where a journey that began with a broken wagon axle had led to a union of hearts and minds, of shared purpose and enduring love. The years that followed proved that their marriage was as strong and enduring as the desert landscape around them. Zara continued her teaching in quartzsite, eventually establishing a proper school when the territorial government finally provided funding in 1882. Garrett maintained his position as foreman at Triple Creek, while helping transform their homestead into one of the most productive small ranches in the area, known for its quality horses and innovative irrigation systems. In the spring of 1880, their first child was born, a son they named Joseph William, honoring both Zara's uncle and Garrett's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Margaret, her middle name a tribute to the woman who had become like a mother to Zara in her new homeland. Through droughts and abundant harvests, through the challenges of territorial life and the joys of building their family and community, Garrett and Zara Jameson remained true to the promises they had made on their wedding day. Their partnership was one of equals, their love deepening with each passing year, their shared life a testament to the unexpected blessings that can arise from life's difficulties. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and the desert stretched peaceful around their home, they would sit on the porch, swing hand in hand, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a broken wagon axle on a dusty Arizona road, where a cowboy fixed more than just a wheel and a woman found more than just assistance. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had both found home.